Hey everyone, Christina here with Burnley and Trowbridge, and today we are bringing you something a little bit different. Let me explain. A couple weeks ago, we put out a survey for you all to see what type of short content video you would want to see in the coming days, and the winner was the Bedgown cuff hack. So for today, buckle up, and we are going to do our very first sewing hack video ever. Obviously, this video is meant to be a companion video to our Bedgown sew along. So if you haven't seen those, go ahead and click here and check those out. But if you didn't do the Bedgown sew along, no worries, we're not judging you, but you should do it. If you have another unlined bedgown, this hack will work for that as well. So it's pretty universal to any bedgown that is unlined, but we're also going to show you how to add it in at the very start. So if you want to do another bedgown with the Bedgown sew along, but you want to do a faced cuff on that one, we will show you in this video how to kind of retrofit the sew along to be able to do that. It's really, really easy, I promise. So grab an unlined bedgown and let's get started. All right, so most of you probably remember this bedgown from part 1. This was the bedgown that Brooke worked up, and we're gonna go ahead and use this bedgown to add a facing. The easiest way to do this is to really start with the garment inside out. So we're gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna turn one sleeve inside out for now. Once we have that sleeve inside out, we are going to take whatever fabric it is that you want to face it in. I'm a stripe on stripe junkie, I'm not gonna lie. I really, really like mixing patterns, mixing stripes and checks and all of those types of things together in maybe like complementary colorways, different scales. And so I actually just grabbed from the shop this piece of kind of a remnant of some of the striped fabric. We still have this, so if you really like this, you can purchase it on the website. I could lay it in this way, so I could just have my two stripes kind of going the same way. Or what I'm actually going to do, because I like the aesthetic of it a little bit better, is I'm going to lay it in this way. You may not be into this, that's okay. You can pick really like whatever makes your heart happy. If you're doing this as a modern bedgown, go nuts. If you're doing it as a historical piece, look at surviving garments, look at images, do your research, figure out how you want to interpret that, where you're interpreting, all of those good things, right? So for today though, I'm going to go ahead and do this. So the first thing that I need to do is figure out how long my fabric is going to need to be cut. And I'm also going to need to then figure out how kind of wide I want to cut that strip as well. We all know I don't really dig measuring, so I am just going to eyeball this. Feel free, if measuring is your jam, go ahead and use a measuring tape and you can kind of get a nice, measurement off of that. The reason I'm going to eyeball it though is really because I want to make sure that I'm giving enough ease, and I want to also be able to kind of see my overlap. So what I'm going to do to get the length that I need is I'm going to, starting at my seam, I'm going to lay that down at the seam. And I'm just going to kind of wrap it around just like that. So you can actually see kind of on the inside there. Once that is kind of wrapped around like you see there, give yourself a little bit of overlap. You can see, got there. I'm gonna go to this blue stripe. If for no reason, then I think it's going to be easier to cut along the blue stripe than it's going to be to cut along the cream stripe that's right next to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a pin there to mark that for me. And then I need to know kind of how wide I need to cut that. I'm going to go ahead and lay it down, and I want to give myself a little bit of overlap at the end because that's going to get turned under and hemmed down. But I also need to give myself a little bit of overlap from the seam there where we pieced our sleeve together. If you did not piece in a sleeve extender because your fabric didn't require it for your size, or you had really wide fabric and you didn't need to do that, that's fine. You can eyeball this. You could just fold your sleeve up and then mark kind of where that under part of the fold would be. And then when you unfold it, then you know that that's how high you need to cut that. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the sleeve extension, leaving a little bit of overlap on my hem side, and I'm going to leave a little bit of overlap here at the sleeve extension so that I have enough to turn under. Now, when I say a little bit of overlap, I don't have a measurement in mind for that. So use your judgment. And when I say that, I really do mean it. I would probably not usually leave this much overhang that you see here. That's a little bit much for me. I like to do kind of really tiny turns. This is a really nice linen, so I know it's not going to get really ravelly. But if leaving a little bit of extra makes you feel more confident in learning to start eyeballing things, then I would encourage you to do that. It's not going to hurt anything. That little bit of fabric is not going to be kind of detrimental to the rest of the garment. So feel free to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room if it makes you feel like you have permission to explore a new skill. I think that that's really important. As you get better at eyeballing things, you'll get better at knowing exactly how much you need to leave yourself for that turn under, or really what modern sewers would call the seam allowance. So don't feel pressured to do everything kind of so precisely all the time. And do feel free to give yourself permission to try new things and maybe sometimes even mess up at them. Honestly, that's a big part of learning. All right, now that I am off of my try new things soapbox, once you have your marks, and you can see I have my mark here and my mark here, I'm going to need to cut. And there are a couple of ways that you can do this. Now, I marked a stripe here so that I can cut along that stripe, so that's perfect. That's going to be super easy. You could pull a thread if you needed to. You can pull a thread on the cross grain if you need to. Or if you're feeling really adventurous and you're up to trying new things, which we encourage you to do, I'm going to go ahead and follow this down to about there just to put a mark. And instead of pulling a thread, which I usually pull threads on everything because I'm a fan of, well, pulling threads. I like it. I like the precision. I like the security of knowing that I am cutting on the straight of grain and not having to feel like I'm second guessing myself. But you could also develop your eye. If you can see the cross grain, then go ahead and just cut on the grain. You don't have to pull a thread every time. Pulling a thread can be useful when you really need things to be exactly square and very precise. This is not necessarily one of those instances where that is the case. This isn't like a shift or a shirt where we're using like very strict geometry for fabric economy. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut this by eye today. And now I'm just going to use my eye to cut along the grain. If it's not perfect, that's okay. If it is perfect, then you can brag about it to your friends. Hopefully your friends would understand. And If your friends don't understand why that's so amazing, then we're your friends now, and you come brag about it to us. And now you can see why I put that pin there, because I'm getting very close to that stripe, and this is a little easier to see than the pin over here. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut right to the stripe. There we go. I'm just going to cut along the stripe to my other cut. And there we go. I now have a nice little rectangle that is going to lay into my other sleeve. So you're going to want to cut another one of these for the other sleeve. So you can, if you want to, just lay this down. And you can just cut another one out. So once you have those cut, we are going to come back to our bedgown and put the seam up. Will probably be the easiest way to do this. And because I have the selvage here, and this is a fuzzy selvage, I'm going to go ahead and cut that off. You could just leave it underneath because nobody's going to see it, but I don't want the extra bulk in there. I know that I try to eliminate bulk where I can, so I'm just going to do that for her too. I'm going to go ahead and lay that down where it is just over the seam. And I can feel my other piece right in here. And I can see my hem right there, so it's kind of nice and centered. And I'm going to pin first. And then I will probably base. I know you're surprised about that. So at this point, what I like to do is I like to actually secure this down. So I'm turning just a little bit under. Ooh, my stripe matches a little bit. Brooke would be so proud of me. I'm just going to carefully pin that. There are two ways that you can do this going forward. You can hem this down almost to the edges and then lift up to make sure that you're not hemming the part you're going to turn. That's probably the way that I'm going to do it today because that's how I like to do it a little bit better. The other thing that you could do though is actually turn your top and bottom under. You can hem those around and then you can hem down your interior. But I'm going to go ahead and hem my center line down first, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. And then I will hem the top and then bottom. So I like to reach through the sleeve to do this and kind of bunch it up. I know it's not always convenient to do that, especially if this is a really heavy fabric, but I just find that I like it a little better. So the important thing when we're doing this is that when I'm hemming the bottom, I don't want to hem through the outer fabric. I only want to hem through the facing layers. And that's because when we finish the bottom and top, we're going to turn that under. And if we hem it through the outer fabric, we're not going to be able to turn it under the way that we need to. So I'm actually pulling the outer fabric back away from the part that I'm going to be stitching. And I'm going to do just like maybe the first 2 inches without going through all of the layers. Once you have the first inch or 2 done, at that point you can go ahead and start stitching. And if you do catch the outer fabric at that seam every couple stitches, that's a great idea because it will kind of help keep this from shifting around before we hem it on the edges. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue hemming, occasionally catching the felled seam underneath. This is really where you're going to rely on your hands to feel what you're sewing. I'm feeling the seam in between the layers to make sure that I'm going into that seam. I'm using my back middle finger actually to feel the point of my needle as it goes through the fabric so I can tell if I've gone too far or not far enough. And that's something that you'll just develop with time and practice. All right, now again, once we get to the last, say, 1.5 to 2 inches, we want to make sure that we are only stitching through the facing layers because we're going to need to be able to turn those under. So this is easy because we can actually just lift this up, hem that down, and there we go. So now we have that piece turned. The next thing that I like to do is actually the top section. So I like to go ahead and starting right at my seam because it's just an easy place to start. If you look behind, you can actually see the seam from the sleeve extension. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this facing to just the top of the sleeve extension. So I just want to cover, just barely cover the stitching of that sleeve extension. If you do not have a sleeve extension, you're just going to turn this under whatever amount you left yourself and you'll just stitch it through the outer, not a big deal. Great, so once that is pinned, we're going to go ahead and just hem around the top. Because I know you all love hemming. You have to love hemming for as much as you guys hang around us, I tell you. It's most of what we do. And let's just hem it. All right, so once you have hemmed the top the whole way around, then we're just going to move down to the bottom. Now, we have already hemmed the exterior because this was a bedgown that was already made up, unlined. So there are 2 options here. You can pick out the hem and kind of iron it flat and then just fold it under once instead of turning it twice. And then you would just fold this under and hem that down, and that would be how you finish the edge. If you really don't want to have to pull all of your stitching out, it's not going to hurt anything to simply turn this under and hem it overlapping those stitches. So you don't want to turn it under super high where you see that outer hem. You want to turn it under just to the edge. You can essentially just hem this down through just the inside layer of that turned hem so you don't see the stitches on the outside. But either way is fine. I know some people are going to want to pull that hem out, flatten it, make sure that there's not any extra bulk there, and that's a really good way to do it. But I know also some of you are really not going to want to do that extra work, and that's okay. This will work just as well for retrofitting a bedgown. Either way, whether you decided to pull that out and flatten it, or if you decided to just go ahead and do it as is, you're going to want to fold this under and secure it. And you do want to make sure that you're keeping this kind of nice and tight, because you don't want this facing to end up bagging out of your sleeve later on. So you want to, pull it nice and taut, but you also want to have it pretty close to the edge there. You don't want to have a huge section of the outer fabric showing. And we're just going to do the same thing that we did where we kind of turn the sleeve a little bit, turn a little more of that under, rotate the sleeve a little bit, turn a little more of that under. Just like you see me doing here. And now you see why we wanted to leave that extra bit not attached there, because that's going to make it nice and easy for us to turn under here. All right, so once that is pinned, we are going to go ahead and hem this down just the way that we did the top. So let's get to hemming. All right, so once you're done hemming, it should look something like this, only that's upside down. Something like this. And remember, we're on the inside right now, so we want to go ahead and turn this right side out. And if we were to fold this back now, we have a super cute little turn back. So if you were to put this on, you have a nice facing on the cuff. You can fold it twice if you want it a little shorter, and there you go. So you probably remember this guy. This is Angela's bedgown that she is working on from the sew along. You probably saw this in the live. If you missed those, you can go back and watch them. They're still on YouTube. And if you remember, she was putting this nice printed cotton facing and the cuff of this other printed cotton. Now, we don't have either of these fabrics at the moment, but we might be getting one of them back in stock. That will largely depend on the results of the printed cotton survey that hopefully all of you took in the last couple of weeks. But the fabric aside, to put a facing in on the cuff from the very beginning is actually really simple. You can go ahead and just cut your sleeve extension piece with your facing fabric as well. So you'll cut it out of your bedgown fabric, and then you'll cut another one out of your facing fabric. So once you've cut your facing, you are going to go ahead and start your bedgown just the way that we told you in the second segment of Bedgown Sew Along. You're going to seam the sleeve extension onto the sleeve. The thing you're going to do differently, however, is you're just going to seam it. You're not going to fell it. So just like you see here, you can leave that seam for the sleeve extension without felling it, because we're gonna lay the sleeve extension over that in just a minute. We're just gonna turn that seam allowance towards the end of the sleeve, towards the hem. Once that is done, we're gonna go ahead and take our sleeve extension and turn under a little bit of your sleeve extender on the side that we're going to match up with the seam. So when we get ready to seam the body, we're going to put our sleeve pieces together just like this. And then on the section that has the little turn, we're going to go ahead and lay that down. Just like that, kind of match it up. And the important thing here is we want that fold to not be below the sleeve extension seam. We want it to kind of just ride right on that seam. And then it should come down, if we cut nicely, if we were careful when we were cutting, it should come down just about to the edge of our sleeve. So not a problem there. Now, here's where you want to be careful, because we only want to stitch, when we start to seam up the seam, we only want to stitch through 3 of those 4 layers. We want 1 layer of the sleeve extension, and then we want 2 layers of the bedgown. So let's go ahead and we can pin this. And you can do just kind of a running back stitch or a spaced running back stitch here on the very bottom where we're going to be turning under the hem. You don't want to seam all the way down through all layers, or we won't be able to turn the hem under. Kind of like on the last method where we had to leave a little bit of it loose. So for, I would say, the last 1/2 inch or so, we actually want to start seaming kind of right there. So I'll go ahead and mark that with a pin. So we can seam that first 1/2 inch or so through the outer layers just fine. So I'll go ahead and put a couple stitches in there. And then once you have a couple stitches in there, you can drop down and then just take your next stitch up through all 3 layers. And then you can just continue your seaming through all 3 of your layers. And we'll just stitch that whole seam down the body just like we would normally. All right, so once that's seamed and you're felling that seam down, which I've already started to do, we are not going to fell here. So we're going to actually turn that this way. You can see we're kind of felling here. So go ahead and drop the felling just far enough to kind of encase those raw edges. So once this is felled down, then we'll do our next step. All right, so that is felled. And now will probably be the next easiest thing to do is to lay in across the top. So we're going to go ahead and remember I said we could kind of fold that earlier. So now we're just going to go really nicely, keep that fold nice and clean, keep it kind of just at the edge of that seam, pin it down. We're going to do that the whole way around. Right, and so there we are, kind of back at the beginning. And we want to leave this last little bit open for the moment for us to be able to turn this under. So let's go ahead and we'll just pin it for now. And let's hem this top section and we'll come back and I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so that top section is now hemmed. It's kind of all secure. We've got the bottom section pinned. But before we go any further, let's take care of this bit here. What we're going to want to do is we've got this little flappy bit now that's left after we have hemmed. So we're going to want to go ahead and fold that over. And we're going to turn it back. And you want to turn it so that just like it did with the hem at the top, we want it to just come up to our seam and then give it a nice press. So we want it to just cover that seam. Then we can pin this. And just like we did for the top, we're going to go ahead and hem this down, and then we will come back to deal with the bottom. So remember with this, when we get to the bottom, again, we want to leave a little bit unstitched. We can stitch through the top 2 layers, so we can stitch through the facing only, but you don't want to stitch through all layers when you get to the bottom because we need to be able to turn that under. So at this point, I'm only stitching through the facing. The last thing that we're going to do is we need to finish the hem of the sleeve. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn under the outer fabric just like that, and then we will turn our facing to meet it. You want to have maybe a little bit like you see right there, where that facing is coming just almost to the edge of the outer fabric, but not quite the whole way. So we're going to do that the whole way around. And here you can see we got to that seam where we hadn't stitched the pieces together because we need them to be able to fold under. If you forgot, it happens all the time. So if you forgot and you stitched everything the whole way down, that is fine. All you need to do is just pull a few of those stitches to give you enough room to turn it under. It is not the end of the world. We have all been there, trust me, more times than we probably care to admit. So don't feel bad about that at all. All right, so once you have that pinned or basted or secured, however you want it to be secured, we'll go ahead and hem this up and then we're going to be done. So let's see what this looks like once it's all hemmed. That's done. Let's turn it inside out or right side out. Let's turn it right side out. And you can see that really nice turn back. All right, so now you have a bedgown cuff facing set in two ways, so you can pick which way is the right way for you for your project. And that's it for today. So, thank you so much for joining us today. We, as always, appreciate any feedback that you want to leave for us in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for any new short videos that we put up, like more hacks, our cap sew along, or maybe some other surprises that we have coming. And head over to Instagram and Facebook to get the latest news on what's happening here at Burnley and Trowbridge, and also to see what new fabrics are available. In the meantime, we hope that you are staying healthy and safe. And until next time, happy hacking!